And I am here with someone I call the Bishop, Craig Cavanis, who's the pastor of Grace Church. So welcome to the second episode of the reboot. Craig, how you doing?
Hey, good man. Great to be together today, Chauncey. And since we talk about cultural differences, that's some of our theme this year. And we're talking about that. I will point out that you're the only one that calls me the bishop at Grace Church. Maybe your wife. I don't know if Takia does or not. I think she calls me Craig, but you call me the bishop. So that's just a little bit of a different church background, right?
That's right. Maybe we'll get to that one of these days.
Maybe that'd be a great one. How to address a pastor in your church? How do you do that culturally? Because it is different depending on where you are.
Exactly. Well, I'm so excited to be here again and looking forward to not only today but upcoming talks with you as we kind of go behind the scenes as to what's going on with the church in terms of the current theme, and being able to give a little more insight to what's being preached on Sunday and perhaps some special guests to add some additional information to the theme. And with that, so Craig, some folks may have missed the last episode or haven't had an opportunity to view it. So why are we rebooting the podcast? It was around for a while and it was great. Why the reboot? Why now?
Well, we felt like it'd be a great opportunity to just have some conversation, some dialogue, maybe even some casual teaching a little bit on the theme for the year. And our theme for the year is learning to love cross-culturally. And so we felt like sometimes there are things that I'd love to dialogue about, or I'd love to explain, or questions that arise that I'd love to attempt to answer. So we just thought a podcast is a great opportunity to be able to do that. You and I have been friends for a lot of years and have certainly had conversations on these topics. So we thought it'd be great for you and I to try to do that together. So that's a little bit why we thought, boy, given the theme and given there's the topic about cross-cultural life in a church and ministry leaves so many unanswered questions for folks at times. That we thought, hey, this would be a good opportunity to talk about those things.
That's good. And so you mentioned the topic being learning to love cross-culturally. And as I kind of thought about that topic this week, this question came to mind: learning to love cross-culturally. Why do you think we have to learn to love cross-culturally as opposed to, hey, shouldn't we just love everyone anyway? Why do you think that's a learning process, learning to love? Why do we have to go through that process, you think?
Well, it's a great question. I appreciate you bringing that. You know, I would want to say, first of all, I think I think it as a theme, it just indicates that we've not arrived. You know, some podcasts have hosts or guests with, like world-class expertise or something. We're not that podcast. So I'm very happy to say we are learning, and you and I are learning with everybody in our church. We're learning together through God's word primarily, but then also through our own experiences together as a local church, trying to reach out to folks who may be different than any of us are as individuals. And so this is a podcast where we're dialoguing about how we're learning and how we're taking small steps, not follow us because we do it perfectly or something like that. Well, I think we have to learn to love, because to love someone, you really have to know them. To love someone well, you have to understand them. You have to be able to some degree, know how they experience life. And you have to be able to, empathize with someone else's life to love them. To love, you need to listen. You need to understand. And I think when it comes to cultural issues, ethnic issues, and there would be other categories as well, perhaps age differentiation as well. There'd be other categories we could put here, male and female. I think we could put, other subjects here. But I think that we shouldn't presume or assume that we know someone else's experience, and I think we need to learn that. And so that's why we've emphasized that it's there are sometimes barriers between people that we may not even be aware of. There are sometimes challenges to our relating because someone else maybe they're not speaking up, but there's something that is occurring, or the way we're relating, or the way we do things, that is a hindrance in some way. And unless there's a freedom to talk about that and to ask questions of one another, then I think it's hard to love well, faithfully. So anyway, I think any married couple will tell you this. When they first get married, the experience is often, wow, there's a lot to learn. I mean, why can't we just love each other? Well, because maybe we don't understand each other's background. She was raised in a very different family than I was. And so we have different backgrounds, different perspectives. In the case of marriage, we're different by gender, maybe some of our perceptions and the way we encounter the world. So there's no relationship as intimate, obviously, as a marriage. So I'm not comparing church membership to marriage at that level. But there is I think it's a helpful analogy that just says, I got a lot to learn.
So it's safe to assume that Grace Church is seeking to be a cross-cultural church. Right?
Yeah.
Is that safe? Okay, so it's something we're doing on purpose.
Yeah.
What are the challenges you think there are to being a cross-cultural church? We're in Frisco, Texas. Some may not know what that looks like, but as you'll probably speak about, that plays a big part into trying to be a cross-cultural church. So what are some of the challenges you see and have experienced with trying to become a cross-cultural church?
Yeah, well, I think the challenges have a lot to do with just sort of the cultural context, and I'd say that more on a national level, not just on a local level. The kind of context we find ourselves in these days, where everything is polarized, everything is politicized, and it's just hard to have a conversation about a topic like culture or ethnicity. And we could add to that too, gender. It's hard to have a conversation about these things without people reacting sharply at times, or expecting that the other person's going to react sharply. And so there is this, well, I don't want to be misunderstood. And so what do I even say? What's offensive? If I ask that question, am I getting canceled down at the church? There could be just this sense in the culture we're in where it seems like everybody's living on their last nerve. And there's not a lot of patience at times with some of these topics. And I think what happens is that because it can be so prone to misunderstanding, people just don't want to have the conversations. And what I found is that I find it difficult. One of the challenges for me is I find it difficult just to have appropriate verbiage at times to even have these conversations. I'm tossing around some topics on Sunday morning, and I'm aware that everybody's not going to understand. Some people are going to hear me say one thing, somebody's going to hear me say something else. So for instance, we talked from the very beginning about being that was one of the terms we used, being a multi-ethnic church. Why? Well, we live in a city that's multi-ethnic, and we want to reach our city. Our congregation has grown increasingly multi-ethnic, and we want to reach the nations with the gospel. And so we have to have a heart and an understanding for other ethnicities, other people groups, we could even say. So even a word like that, what does multi-ethnic church mean to people? Is that a good term? Is that a bad term? I use the term because in Revelation 7, where we started the whole year. It says that, every nation, people, tribe, and tongue, that people from all of those groups would be represented before the Lord in eternity. And so that word ethnic, ethnos, is the word which is nation. It's translated nation in that passage. Every nation. Sometimes it's translated people, but in Revelation, in that passage, it's every nation. So it's every multiple ethnos, ethnicity, or nation, or people, however you want to, that can be translated any of those ways. So actually the word like multi-ethnic is in the text, every ethnic group. It's actually in the text. And so it's not in your English translation, but the concept's clearly there. So I've used language like that but I think you just never know. Is somebody hearing some kind of, is he like some progressive
Mm,
multicultural, that's even a buzzword? Is he bringing some kind of crazy ideas here? Another one, if I could say, that's been difficult is I've talked about minority and majority population.
mhm,
To me, I think those are very neutral. We just mean that majority means more, there's more of one group, more than 50% even, we could say. I'm not sure we're using that word technically like that, but more than half the group is one classification: male, female, young, old,
mhm,
black, white, Texan, American, whatever the designation might be. The majority is that, and then the minority is groups of others that are not the majority group. Maybe it's not over 50%, but it's the largest group, something like that.
mhm,
So I've used that kind of language, and we saw, back in Acts 6, when we did the passage about the Grecian Jewish widows were being overlooked. And they were being overlooked by the Hebraic Jews. They were the majority. So I talked about the majority culture in that case was overlooking care for the minority culture. And I understand that when I do that, that's going to, people are going to hear different
mhm,
things. They're not going to hear Greek Jews, Hebrew Jews in that case, people from Israel and Jews who lived outside of Israel. When I use that kind of language, they're going to hear, oh, wait a minute, are you mapping that onto our culture? Are you
mhm,
saying the majority is always overlooking the minority? Are you saying in a white church, all the white church members are racist? Is that what you're
mhm.
saying? Absolutely. I'm saying nothing like that. And yet, in our culture, you hear things, oh, they're talking about caring for minorities. Oh, I know what you mean. And you map on American history and to that. And all of a sudden, people are drawing conclusions thinking I'm perhaps they're not thinking this, but
Mhm,
I
mhm,
just know in the environment we're in, someone may be thinking, and I don't fault them. They don't, maybe someone doesn't know me or hasn't been here and
mhm,
hears me use a word like minority, referring to ethnicity. And all of a sudden you think, oh, we're just saying all majority people are bad to all minority people, or something like that, white versus other ethnic minorities. And where the reality is, we're just looking at one situation that the text doesn't tell us there was discrimination or favoritism. It does say there was neglect, so that's an
mhm,
issue. But I was just trying to teach that text with language that would be relatable. But I realized that in our world, that those kind of terms, any differentiating term around ethnicity, can be loaded. And
mhm,
so sometimes there is an issue. Sometimes a majority population, pick any race, any group, any demographic. Sometimes a majority population overlooks a minority population. They just
mhm,
are living the way they're familiar. They're not aware. There's a blind spot. It could be anywhere on a scale from ignorance and blindness to intentional discrimination and exclusion, or prejudice.
mhm.
There's a range of why someone could be overlooked, and they wouldn't all be sinful or offensive. There could be different kinds of reasons for that. And then sometimes, like the text here, it just doesn't say that that's the case. It could have just been
Mhm,
an administrative oversight. So I think there's a tendency for majority not to see needs of a minority population, and I think there's tendency at times for someone in a minority population to potentially even read into a situation when
mhm,
there's no intentionality of overlooking them or having prejudice towards them or
mhm,
discriminating them towards them, but it could be a perception. I think you shared when we were with small group leaders this summer, you shared an example from your own life, Chauncey, at Grace Church, where you made an assumption about something that was inaccurate.
mhm.
Would you mind telling that story? It's a good story.
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate what you're saying as far as, you know, two people can hear the same thing and it land differently based on experiences, and so coming from, the minority population, if you will, at Grace Church anyway,
Yeah,
uh, the radar tends to be up sometimes.
sure.
And that has nothing to do with Grace Church at all, just in society as a whole. And so I recall a couple of years ago, it was in the lobby of the church. I think it was in between services or something like that. And I was waiting for my wife, who, I'm always waiting for her because she's so social, way more social than I am. But I'd overheard some folks talking about community groups, and I think we were at that period where, because we offer the invitation to explore other community groups after a certain number of months. I think it was during that time period. So
Yeah.
there was discussion about who was going to stay with which group or who was going to explore and look at other groups. And I overheard someone say, "Yeah, I'm thinking about joining the Black group." And the person who they were talking to said, "Yeah, I hear that's a really good group. I'm thinking about visiting the Black group myself." And so, as a community group leader myself,
Yeah. Yeah.
overhearing that, what I heard was, "Oh, they're thinking about coming to my group."
Yeah.
And I was a little offended. I was like, well, how in the world would they, or why would they want to refer to my group as the Black group as opposed
Yeah.
to the almond community group? And I'm like
Sure.
ready to, I'm upset. Why would
Yeah.
they use
Sure.
that term? And then it hit me. Then I felt so stupid. It hit me that there is a community group leader, their family, and their last name is Black.
Yeah.
So they were saying that they wanted to visit the Black group and not the African American group. But here's something interesting about this, Craig. My wife and I, in the past, as we've had numerous groups, and in certain times, groups have had more African Americans than others in our group, and
Yeah.
we amongst ourselves, my wife and I, jokingly call our group the Black group. And
Yeah.
we've even presented it to Africans. Hey, we got the Black group over here. If you want
Yeah.
to come, and it's going to be more similar experiences, there was no problem. But it's how it's perceived. So when I heard someone else say it, oh, that was a potential problem. But then I have to remind myself, hey, but when you said it, when I said it,
Yeah.
it was fine. So
Yeah.
that's I think that's just a really good example of how people can hear one thing and take it another way depending on their experiences.
Yeah, that is so helpful. And these are the kind of things we need to be able to talk about. For you to be able to talk about that publicly is really helpful. It might be helpful for other Black members of our church or other people from other minority ethnicities in our church as well. It's also helpful for people in the majority population to hear that, because what you're saying is, hey, I misheard something, and that there was nothing going on there at all. And
Hmm.
I think we've got to identify when I've got a blind spot. I've got to be able to identify that and acknowledge that, and at times laugh about it. That's the other thing, is some of this
Hmm.
stuff, and it is serious. There's um, racism is no laughing matter. There's nothing
Hmm.
humorous about
Hmm.
it. So intentional, harmful,
Right.
um, acting maliciously towards people because of the color of their skin, or their nationality, or their language, or whatever. That's not funny. But some of the stuff we're talking about here, that's sort of the misunderstanding thing. We do have to
Hmm.
be able to laugh a bit and not take ourselves too seriously, I think, because that's another reason you share that story and somebody be very comfortable saying, "Hey, well, let me share something, and I had a misperception, or could you explain this to me?" I mean,
Hmm.
that kind of humanity and that kind of realism, that you just shared, the humor of it as well. It allows us to be real, and it allows us to dialogue and have conversations with one another, where the stakes of every line and every question don't feel like they're so high. And
Hmm.
if I ask this question, I don't understand something, I'm going to be forever viewed as this evil racist or something. So I think it's great to be able to have these kinds of share these kinds of examples, have these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, and I appreciate the fact that Grace Church is pursuing ethnic unity, as a goal, as a focus. It's the theme. But I would imagine that there's some churches who are a little hesitant to kind of go down this path, to know that, or to publicly proclaim, hey, we're actually seeking to be a cross cultural church. We're
Yeah.
seeking to be, multi ethnic. But why do you think there's some churches who are hesitant to even talk about it? You think they're afraid of certain things, or why the hesitancy?
Well, first of all, I want to be careful comparing ourselves to someone else and make ourselves look favorable or something like that, because I can
Hmm.
relate to the hesitancy that you're speaking of right there, that you're
Hmm.
asking about. So I'd say I don't think our leaders are above feeling that hesitancy. And there are times when something will happen, I'll say, "Oh man, well, it'd be easier if we weren't talking about this or didn't address this." I do feel that way at times, so I
Hmm.
understand. Um, why not talk about it? A few things I would say is, one is just faithfulness to God's mission. not only do we see throughout Scripture, and we're seeing this in Acts, that God, his plan from the beginning was to have a multi-ethnic church in a context where there are there's multi-ethnicities. You can't make that happen in a context, a city where that's not the population isn't diverse. You can't do that. And I think there's also places for single. I do think there is a place for single ethnicity churches, mono-ethnic, I guess you'd say, instead of multi-ethnic. I'm not sure the term. I can think of a few reasons. One of the most obvious reasons would be language. So if you're in Frisco and you speak Chinese, that's your primary language. I know of a Chinese speaking church in Frisco that it makes total sense that you're gathered around your language. So I think there's definitely times and reasons for, mono-ethnic churches. But I think there could be a tendency not to go down this road. And I read somebody I thought was very helpful. This isn't going to be really professional, but it's going to hold up a book. This is the NIV application commentary. It's commentary, and it's written by a guy named AET Fernando. I think it's pronounced AET. I'm showing some of my cultural ignorance there, so hopefully nobody's offended if I said it wrong. But his commentary has been super helpful to me. I have other commentary. I'm using quite a few as we're studying. But he's the only commentary I'm using that's written by someone outside of the U.S. or the U.K. And this is a challenge in scholarship. I mean, there's just not as many published works from scholars from that aren't Western, and I'll just say that aren't Western, but are from other parts that are from Latin America or from Asia or Africa. And so I find his insights fantastic. And one of the reasons is that he's Sri Lankan. And he's a scholar, but he's writing about his own church at points and how the Book of Acts applies there. And he says he writes in here that his church is made up 75% of people who've been converted out of Buddhism, or they've converted Hindus. So very different context. There's plenty of Hindus in Frisco, but a different context than ours, and because they've been converted out of that, and some Muslim converts as well. So he's not in the same world that we are, and they've got their own. So when he talks about ethnic challenges, they're not the ones we think of in the U.S. They're people that, we don't even understand what y'all are fighting about over there, what people are getting, how people are judging each other there. We don't even get it. So it's really helpful to hear from somebody outside of our context address these issues. And so in this in the section on the widows being overlooked and neglected, he has a section where he says that the church needs churches that are multi-ethnic today or multicultural. But he says there's three primary obstacles you face if you want to pursue that. He says, first of all, today's pragmatism always looks at success in terms of measurable results. Having a monocultural church, many say, helps achieve this kind of success, rapid, more growth. But biblical principles should take priority over the success principle. So what he's saying is that churches tend to grow faster and grow better when they have less cultural diversity. And you can think of a lot of reasons. People walk in and go, oh, they get me. I fit in here. I'm very comfortable. When I was in seminary, I took missions classes, a few missions classes, and there was something taught called the homogeneous unit principle. Homogeneous, obviously meaning same, unit meaning a group, and so they basically taught that to be effective in building a church or reaching a people, you should draw people that as best you can that are similar, all the same, and obviously in language that makes sense. I use the example for if you want to reach Chinese and they only speak Chinese, well, you should be speaking Chinese. So take the language out of it, though. Wherever many people speak English in our city, and we can gather English speakers, it's easier the more similar you are to grow. And you see that now. I've read studies where churches that are very politically aligned and overt in their politics, certainly conservative churches, are the fastest growing churches. So if you're going to center around the kingdom and not center around right or left politics, it's going to be a slower go because there's going to be more misunderstanding. And he's saying that sort of like if you just want to measure success by external growth, it's easier, if I could say it this way, I hate the language, but it's easier to grow a church if you do it with very similar people for obvious reasons. There's less difficulty and people feel more at home. Number two, he says, today's society tries to avoid pain and unpleasantness, and multicultural churches usually experience pain as a result of misunderstandings and cultural insensitivity. We can demonstrate that Christ can make people one. This is an important message in a world broken by ethnic, caste, and class strife. So he's saying there's inevitably, if you're around people different, you, there's going to be some misunderstanding. And especially if you go beyond the surface, you go down to more transparent relationships, there's going to be some misunderstanding. There's going to be some offense, and it's just easier to avoid. Let's get in a context where I'm less likely to be in disagreeable situations with people who think differently than me. So let's give me my race, my boy, if we can go my age, like my demographic there, a boomer church, a millennial church, boy, that's even better. And if we can go same political views, man, now I'm really comfortable, you know, but if the more you mix that up, I'm going to be set up for discomfort, and we don't want that. And number three, he says, established Christians are often unwilling to change practices in their church to welcome newer people. He talks about worship styles, music, time of worship, and you and I have talked about that. So maybe we'll talk about that on another podcast. But the idea that if we have different people coming to the church, not that we're just consumer oriented, that we're just saying, hey, what's a poll? What does everybody want? That's what we're into. We're just here to meet consumer needs. We're not saying that. But if we're going to be relatable to different kinds of people, have different kinds of people influencing and leading, and then there's going to be different feel in the church. And a lot of folks just say, I want to do what I'm most comfortable with. I don't want to be stretched culturally. And so I think that's another reason that it's just easier to say, let's just keep things similar. But how rich it is to have the differences. You know, one quick example is this fall, we have two churches that meet in our building. And besides us, one's a Korean church, one's a Brazilian church, Portuguese speaking church. But to have their two worship bands, music teams, lead us this fall in worship has been wonderful. Even having them sing in their heart language, words that maybe we didn't understand, but could appreciate that God's a global God and a very big God. Those kinds of experiences were rich, not something we'd want to run away from, but something we'd want to learn from and embrace. So I think Fernando's got three great reasons that he says this is why it isn't perhaps in Sri Lanka. That's his experience. But I would say, no, that's the way it is here too. We're pragmatic, and we don't like something that's, definitely uncomfortable. And we don't like to change and adjust. We like just to, keep it the way we've always had it. So it's a long answer. But I thought he did.
No, great response. And I know with the teaching theme this year, or the sermon theme this year being learning to love cross-culturally, this isn't the first time that you've kind of tackled this cross-cultural or multi-ethnic topic. And can you speak to any backlash that you may have felt, if any, in the past, or maybe even during this current series, where people, we've talked about it being uncomfortable. What's some of the things that you've seen, the uncomfortableness, and the impact that it's had on the church?
Yeah, on that one, it's easier for me to address historically than currently. I think because we've done this for a few years and have talked about it more openly, we actually now have people coming to the church because of this. I did a new members meeting this week with someone, and I was asking this person, tell me your story. How'd you come to the church? And they told me the things they were looking for in a church. And they were just saying, well, I came here because what I was looking for, and they mentioned a few things. We wanted expositional preaching. We wanted community, easy to form community and kind of community group, that kind of thing. And we were looking for a church that was multi-ethnic, is what this person said. We didn't want to be in so I thought, oh, wow. 10 years ago, nobody said that when they came to Grace Church. Right. We were looking for a multi-ethnic church, so we kept looking. They wouldn't have landed. So anyway, currently we'd have, I think, more people leaning in. The kind of pushback I would say now would be open but cautious. Let's see where this is going. I like what I've experienced so far. I trust you to date, but to this point, but let me see where you're going with this. And I don't have a problem with that.
Right.
If somebody's asking questions and where are you going, explain this, what does that term mean? Absolutely. That's totally fine. And I would expect that. So there's some of that going on. I think uncertainty in our church right now.
Hmm.
I'm not aware of any significant backlash or offense. So if it's happening, podcast at gracechurchfrisco.org. You can email us. No, seriously, come and talk to us. If you have a concern, talk to one of the leaders. We want to be open and talk about this. I think historically there's been just disagreement over some things along these lines. And we've had people, just full disclosure, we've had people leave the church over this topic. Historically, it would have been more in the COVID era. But during that time, as we addressed some racial issues, particularly during the season right following the George Floyd incident and some things that were happening at that point, we had some people that just had a very different understanding, and as well on some political issues where I think there's been times where the people loved our church, but after a while assumed that we would plant our political flag in a way that we wouldn't during the election, the 2016 or 2020 elections. And it felt like, well, we want to be in a church that will, and we want to be in a church that's going to really be very overt with their politics and connect that to the scripture in a way that we were not doing at this church. So I think we have had people that have disagreed with us. We've had people that have graciously disagreed and stuck around. We've had people that graciously disagreed and left. We've had people, so just a variety. I mean, it wasn't a mass exodus. It was just a low number of folks, but we have had some people. And I always appreciate someone who wants to have a dialogue about it. And even for a Bible believing Christian, for us to say, you know what, here's where we are. Here's where our eldership is. Here's our direction. And if somebody says, you know what, I didn't realize that. It's not kind of what I signed up for. And I think I'm going to go to a more like-minded church. We want to bless that person, send them out. Speak well of them, trust they'll do the same of us, and view it as view some things as a difference. But I've had some people react fairly strongly, and I've been concerned with some people. I've shared my concern for them and how they were viewing things at points, and they've shared their concern for me. So we've had a lot of conversations in recent years, but more recently that I don't sense that. But again, I don't talk to everybody. Everybody doesn't tell us what they're thinking, and I hope they will. Hope we can dialogue. You talk to your small group leader or one of the pastors, or if you do have questions or concerns, let's talk about it, especially before someone leaves. I mean, when you're in the process of questioning, is this the church for me? Have a dialogue when it's a question, not down the road. You may be misunderstanding or misperceiving where the church is coming from, and you don't want to do anything unsettling to picking up and making decisions because of a misunderstanding. And you shared a perfect example. What if you'd come to us and say, you know what, man, we're going to move on to a different church because there's people here that are, judging our group. You would have really missed out, if something like that had happened. So let's have a conversation if there's lack of understanding.
That's good. And so for those at the church now who may be struggling a little bit with this topic, you mentioned a couple of things that you would suggest that they do. One, you gave the email address. Hey, email the church, let's talk about it. Community group, bring it up to your community group in the group, or maybe your community group leader, separately. Are there some other things you would recommend for someone who might be struggling a bit at the church with us going down this path? What's the theme?
On the group thing, I would say let's be transparent in our groups, but let's be wise and discerning. If you read the room a bit, and if you feel like, hey, man, I want to say something that's really strong, maybe you grab the leader for the first time personally. We do want an environment that's safe for people to share what they're thinking. On the other hand, some conversations are better had with a leader. If I might be misunderstanding this, or especially, I'm pretty angry. I'm not just going to throw up on the whole group here. I'm just going to throw up on the leader a little bit. That's what they're there for. And then let's share it with the group later, whatever. So sometimes it's better to talk to a leader first. But yeah, I do think raise it with a group, raise it with your leader. The other thing I would say is, well, why not just take a step of faith and see what happens? And by that, I mean, why don't you reach out to someone different than you? And if you don't have a friendship, oftentimes people that are most concerned with some of these ideas are people that don't have friendships, meaningful dialogue with people of other races, ethnicities, other countries, whatever it might
Mhm.
be. And they have very similar friendships. They live in a social media world that's an echo chamber. They watch or read the same news takes. And
Mhm.
so they don't really have a lot of different voices in their life from people that love Jesus and take his word seriously. And our church is filled
Mhm.
with people that love Jesus and take his word seriously. So you can definitely find someone with a different background or different ethnicity than you to relate to here. Um, and so I would say, why not seek to build a friendship? Reach out, ask someone to coffee, get to know their
Mhm.
story. Tell me your background. Ask
Mhm.
them how this year and this theme is landing on them. They may
Mhm.
be very similar to you. They may be they might be a minority in the minority population in our church, and they may differ with things we're saying. I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't want to pigeonhole anybody and say this is how they
Sure.
have to think. But maybe it's to ask. And get to know someone personally. Have them in your home. Being in one another's homes, being at one another's dinner tables. We've just found this is so significant. It
Mhm.
changes the conversation totally when it's a real person telling me of their experience and that sort of thing. So uh, try to get to know someone else. You come from a different church background, different ethnicity, maybe an ethnic church. What's that like? Well, what do you miss?
Mhm.
What do you appreciate about here?
Mhm.
What kind of family pressures have you felt? This is different for you, from your extended family, just getting to know their world a little
Mhm.
bit. I think some of those things that's the main thing. Cross a cultural line in love and get to know someone who may have a different experience. Maybe they don't, but maybe they do.
Mhm.
Ask them, dialogue with them, and maybe God will grant you a friendship over time that will help make a difference. Friendship like I've had with you, Chauncey, you've made a real difference in my life. I'm grateful for, and
Same here.
your experience is different than mine and your background, and so it's been helpful, and hopefully I've been able to answer some questions for you too. And it's gone both
Absolutely.
ways. It's gone both ways. So
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
think I wish everybody had that. And I think it doesn't change all your views, but it does it makes you hold them in a different way. It makes you
Mhm.
talk about them in a different way.
Mhm.
And it makes you posture yourself as a learner and say, man, I don't know what's going on for everybody. May I help me to be humble, Lord, help me to listen, help me to learn, help me to love.
Mhm.
And that's what's most important, I think, in this.
That's great. And Craig, if you wouldn't mind, close us out with this. As of this recording, we are in the middle of Acts at
Yeah.
the church. Where are you going from here? Once we leave Acts, is that it, or kind of where you're thinking about leading the church in this topic from a sermon standpoint?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're going to be in Acts for a while. So it'll be into the spring, and every passage of Acts won't have the same emphasis as
Mhm.
some of these have early on. But we will. I don't know when you're listening, whoever you are listening to this recording or watching it. I don't know when that is, but this week we're doing the Ethiopian eunuch and his conversion. Same thing, man. It is cross cultural in a significant degree at multiple levels. So we're catching this throughout the book of Acts. So it's been really instructive for me, helpful for me anyway. I hope it has for the church. So we'll be in this for a while. We're going to do a series on the Psalms and later in the year, a particular type of Psalms. So to teach through the Psalms, there's different ways. You can take 150 weeks, which is what, almost 3 years, and go
Mhm.
through every Psalm. We're not going to do that. We're going to look at the lament Psalms
Okay.
because one of the reasons, first of all, we don't know how to lament. I feel like in our culture, we're not, some do. Many of us aren't very good at that. So I think we need to learn, how do we lament? How do we grieve before the Lord? How do we pour out our heart before the Lord when life is challenging? But I've also found it, and you have as well, we've talked about this,
Mhm.
that lament can be a common ground. It can be a bridge builder for us to enter into someone else's suffering, lamenting with
Mhm.
them, and even over ethnic issues, that ethnic unity. That lament can be a tremendous way of entering someone else's world and growing together. So that won't be the full purpose of lament psalms, but that'll be an aspect. So we'll do that. We're also going to do a series this year because I'm asked a lot. I think we're over time. So let me be very brief about this. I'll talk about this on another podcast, Chauncey. But when I
Mhm.
use words like diversity and minority and not multi-ethnic, but maybe multicultural, some people have asked me, and this is a very fair question, Um, what does that mean for issues like gender and sexuality? Are you saying that that's the same as ethnicity? And so I'm going to teach on that this year because we want to bring the gospel cross-culturally to all people, regardless of their lifestyle. We bring the gospel to them. But there's a difference between being a multicultural, multi-ethnic church, celebrating the diversity of someone else's culture in that way, their traditions, their language, those kinds of things, versus being, for instance, we're not an LGBTQ affirming church in terms of affirming the practices, the various practices that would be associated with the LGBTQ community. We're not endorsing those practices. While we love and are compassionate towards everybody and preach the gospel to them, we believe the gospel calls us to a life of sexual integrity. We believe in marriage biblically is between one man and one woman. So we hold a biblically traditional, historic, Orthodox, conservative, all those, I think, work view of marriage. So some people have asked me, when you use that language, is that just the same as? And we would say, no, there's a difference there. You're not called to repent of your ethnicity, but we all are sexually broken. We are all sexual sinners. We are called to repent of sexual sin to come into the kingdom, for sure. All of us, heterosexual, homosexual, whatever. So I'm going to talk about that later in the year, because I think that'll be helpful, helping us to reach out to our community in love and understanding sort of the better story the scripture teaches. Our culture has a story of sexuality and gender, but I think the Bible has a better story. It's a more hopeful story. It's a more life-giving story. And so we're going to do a series called A Better Story and talk about that. So we got that coming up. So those are some of the things we're going to be doing later in the year.
Great. Well, sounds like a lot more conversations to be had.
No doubt.
Hence the term Grace Church Conversations.
Yeah.
So I look forward to having those with you, Craig. And man, this is super helpful. I know for me personally. So thank you. Thank you for your boldness. You talked a lot about the challenges and people being unsure and hesitant, and you're going, hitting it head on. So thank you for your boldness, and thank you for your being candid. We appreciate it.
Brother. Thank you.
All right. Well, until next time, we'll see you on Grace Church Conversations. Take care.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.